This is why you, as someone who supports Israel, should actively support the BDS movement. Because it's a way to save lives, to save Palestinian lives, and to save Israeli lives, and to bring about, as non-violent as possible, a transformation in the situation. So that we might end up, if we're lucky, with something like Northern Ireland, with some sort of power-sharing administration. We might end up, if we're lucky, with something like South Africa. We don't need to end up with even worse bloodshed than we have now. So I hope that we can count on your support. As well as the Nelson Mandela, we can't carry these analogies too far. We have to be careful about oversimplifying and drawing simple analogies. But you also need an Israeli F.W. de Klerk. And what I mean by that is somebody to recognize that the game is up in a sense, and that change is inevitable and it should be transitioned as peacefully as possible. And I think there's one very instructive moment in South Africa that F.W. de Klerk wrote about and others have written about, when he became president of apartheid South Africa. And he gathered his generals and security people together and asked them, how long can we go on? How long can we maintain our situation? And their answer was basically indefinitely, that militarily there is no challenge to us. And the ANC militarily is very weak. The surrounding states are weak. We're under no military threat, internally or externally. But the escalating costs will be in terms of continued erosion in our legitimacy, continued external pressure, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the best conclusion is for us to unravel this situation, to dismantle it willingly, and to transition through negotiations. Mind you, they didn't give up easily. The white regime tried. They tried to hold on to as much as they could. But I think this is the point Israel is at now. I mean, the point is that the South African regime was never defeated militarily, and the military balance of power never changed. What it was is the loss of legitimacy and the external pressure. And so you have people like the Reut Institute recognizing this moment approaching for Israel, where militarily Israel is, unbeatable. But military victories do not secure Israel. The military victories no longer impose Israel's will on its enemies. And you have, in addition to that, the increasing illegitimacy of the regime in the eyes of the outside world. That Israel cannot defend its policies in terms of the universal principles that are now commonplace in the world. It has to plead to be considered a special case, that we, the Jewish people, are very special and like no other, therefore we should be permitted to do what no one else is permitted to do. Well, that's not an argument that is going to convince many people. So the question is, will there be an Israeli de Klerk to understand now is the moment for us to embrace, to listen, to stop demonizing? I mean, I'll be accused for saying this, as I always am, of being a Hamas sympathizer or whatever it is. But Israel keeps saying, we do not negotiate with terrorists, we do not negotiate with those who don't recognize us, we don't do this, we don't do that. In fact, the only people Israel has been negotiating with for the past year is Hamas over the release of prisoners of war. And Hamas are saying, we will agree to a 10-year or 15 or 20-year truce. We don't see a political solution now, but maybe if we end the bloodshed, we can reach a point where the next generation can see some sort of peaceful future. And the former head of the Mossad, not the one who Interpol is currently looking to arrest for the attack in Dubai, has actually advised publicly that Israel should basically accept this offer of Hamas. So the question is, are there people in Israel who will start to see that we can stop demonizing, we can start listening, we can begin to view this as being other than a dead end and other than a fight to the death? And I think that that's really a question, as much as where are the Palestinian Mandelas, where are the de Klerks. I think BDS will produce the Israeli de Klerks, so we have to escalate it. I mean, there's no place for ethnocracy. You know, we had effectively ethnocracy in the Deep South in this country. Jim Crow is a form of ethnocracy. It had to go. Alabama and Mississippi and all those states were not destroyed. The end of Jim Crow is not the destruction of Alabama. I mean, but that's the analogy. People say that ending apartheid in Israel or ending ethnocracy would be the destruction of Israel. It wasn't the destruction of South Africa. It wasn't the destruction of Alabama. Although people said, they said, this is an attack on our way of life. This will end our way of life if we end Jim Crow. But that's not a way of life worth preserving or protecting. It's one that should be ended. So, you know, it's not in the United States, where we nominally have liberal democracy and freedom of religion. It's perfectly possible to be a Jew. It's perfectly possible to be any flavor of Jew you want to be. And there are many flavors of Jew, and Muslim and Christian and everything else. That's a society, I think, worth fighting for. That's threatened. There are people who want this country to be declared a Christian nation, or you know, whatever kind of nation they want it to be declared. I oppose that, whether you know people want to declare something a Muslim nation or a Muslim state or a Christian or a Jewish or any other. So a society in which everyone can be is worth fighting for. I think there are lots of Israelis who would support that. And I think that, again, we shouldn't underestimate how much fear holds this together. That there are Israelis who are utterly revolted at what Israel is doing, but whose fear of change, whose fear of the status quo is less than their fear of change. But we have to change that equation. We have to make it so that a critical mass of Israelis decide that the status quo is less tolerable than taking the risk of making the change.
Do you think Israel would ever accept a one-state solution?
The point I was trying to make before is that no group of people who are exercising illegitimate power over another group, as I would argue Israeli Jews are doing in controlling Palestinians, they won't give up power voluntarily. If you ask them and say, okay, will you give up power and share it with us? They say no. So you have to change the equation. So we have to generate boycott, divestment, and sanctions, as was done with apartheid South Africa, so that Israelis will start to see change towards democracy as being desirable rather than a threat. And what I've been trying to say is that while we develop pressure, we also have to start developing a vision that says to Israelis there's an alternative. That we will not accept a racist state. We will not accept a state in which Jews are privileged and we are, in our own native land, we are subjugated. We won't accept that. We demand equality. We demand a dismantling of this system. We demand decolonization, the right of return, restitution of property, and full rights. And what you get in exchange is citizenship. You get legitimacy for the first time. There are some Israelis who will never accept that, whose investment in Israel is in their privilege. I'll give you an example. Yossi Beilin, the former